Okay, welcome back to the channel. Today you'll get a peek at how I develop a new technique for fluke. Now here's some old footage of me messing around with crankbaits in the past. I've caught some fish here and there, but never put a limit catch together or anything of real size. And on this channel, no limit means no video. We do have certain standards to uphold. Now I've been obsessed with the crankbait bite in freshwater these past few seasons, and now it's time for a deep dive into crankbaits for fluke. Similar to the process I went through with hard jerkbait starting a couple of years ago. As you know from those jerkbait fluke videos, it's a constant refining of the bait selection, figuring out how these flatfish relate to a freshwater bass presentation. Figuring out how each crankbait wants to be worked, which colors and profiles and depth ranges are the best fit for targeting flounder from shore. So here we are in present day, and as usual I start off throwing the 1/4 ounce single jig tipped with gulp. I need to know there are fish around before I start throwing the crankbait. The single jig remains the most effective method to quickly dial in an area for feeding fish and eliminate dead water. As I've mentioned countless times, if your goal is just to catch keeper fluke, you really need to learn that technique. And conveniently, I have a full lesson course on light single jigging on my website, cookingandfishing.com. In any case, now that we've established there are feeding fluke around, it's time to go chuck and wind some crankbaits. Now this particular crankbait is the Evergreen X Over. I'll leave links to everything I'm using down below. It's a bait that has sat in my freshwater crankbait box for some time, unused. Now there are thousands of crankbaits on the market, but it seems like I made a lucky choice right off the bat here. So first fish on this crankbait was a keeper, and we're off to a good start. Now by the way, when you see me raising the rod tip, what's happening is I'm lifting the crankbait over the lip of the beach. And as you'll see, many of my bites are coming off the lip that day. So the rod I'm using is also part of the experiment. This is the 7-foot medium Daiwa Rebellion glass composite crankbait rod. This is my first glass comp rod, and I've been testing it out in freshwater for a little bit. So far so good, and especially here I'm using braid to leader, it should help keep fish pinned. There you see the rod doing its job, and my reel is doing work as well. This new Daiwa Zillion is just hands down the best all-around baitcaster on the market, and the drag is super smooth. Alright, second fish on the crankbait, another keeper. Now obviously I do have some idea what type of profile and color might be suitable for fluke. It's not like I pick completely random baits for this experiment. I do look for baits that can cross over from freshwater bass into saltwater and make some educated guesses along those lines, but you guys don't even want to know how many baits I've bought that has caught neither bass or fluke. So yeah, this is a healthier fish, and the third keeper in a row on this crankbait. This sort of reminds me of my first real jerkbait fluke session. The first jerkbait I pulled out of my box was the Duo Realis SP120. And on my first cast, I think I caught a 22 or 23 inch fish. That's how it goes sometimes, but you'll throw that bait until it stops getting bit, and then you'll look for something different. At this point though, I'm very happy with the results. I mean, this fish was 23 inches, and it has some of the prettiest coloring I've seen on a fluke. You'll see me twitch the rod tip here and there, and this bait is marketed as a crossover crankbait jerkbait hybrid, but it does blow out easily if you tap it too hard, so it's mainly a crankbait. Well, that's not a keeper, and my first short of the day, at least on the crankbait. If you guys remember, the first few fish of the day were all shorts, and they came on the quarter-ounce jig head and jerk shad, so wasn't my intention, but we're going to end up having a little comparison there. Okay, another short, and I decided to move after that. Now, I'm not saying there are no more keepers in the area, but there's a lot of beach left to cover. So on this next fish, I'm going to keep the clip running and point out a few things. Now, this is late enough in the video for me to drop some juice. Here's what I'm looking for. Earlier when I came through this area with the jig, I felt a rock pile or a mussel bed, something hard sitting right at the edge of the lip. And I made a note of it to come back and find it with the crankbait. Now, this isn't really something you can pattern because 99% of what you're fishing is soft structure on the beach. It's just sand and edges in the sand. I've also been fooled by horseshoe crabs, believe it or not. Your crankbait will run into something hard and 3 casts later, that hard spot moved 5 yards down the beach. In any case, one basic tenet of crankbait fishing in freshwater is using hard cover on the bottom to deflect your bait. So your bait will swim pretty much on a straight line until that bill hits something hard, and then it'll deflect off center. That change in direction is what triggers bites, and the way I like to crank for bass is with a lot of change-ups in speed and direction through pauses and deflections off cover. Now with fluke, it's a little different. Fluke are on the bottom chasing bait fish up, while largemouth or smallmouth are generally in the water column feeding down, at least when you catch them on a crankbait. For any successful technique targeting fluke, be it a jerkbait or a jig or a crankbait, the key is to manage your hang time, maximizing that glide back down to the bottom with the jig, or modifying your hard base to a very slow float, keeping it above a fluke's face while staying within their strike zone for as long as possible. I hope that makes sense, but in any case, here I'm walking down the beach, casting around with the crankbait, trying to use its bill to find that hard structure. I'm pretty sure it's just a small rock pile, but because I'm not going to deflect the crankbait off that rock pile hard like I would if I were in a lake, what I'm doing is once I find it, and I think this cast I did find it because once I start twitching, it's immediately after contacting that rock pile. And therefore, I'm letting the bait float a little bit off the bottom and then twitching it back down. So I'm trying to keep it in that strike zone if there is a fluke around. And hard structure on a beach is always worth a few casts. It might not hold fluke all the time, but at some point a big fish is going to come across it and decide to use it as an ambushing spot for a tide or two at least. Anyway, that's just a basic rundown on how you should think about crankbaits in general and how it might apply to your fluke game. So another healthy keeper. Now, if you go back and watch, this fish thumped the crankbait. It actually knocked slack in my line. Definitely one of my favorite bites is when a crankbait or jerkbait is just sitting there, barely floating, and a big fluke T-bones it on the way up and then goes past it by a couple of feet before turning back to the bottom. It really does get the blood pumping for sure. Not bad. So that was my last keeper of the day, and yeah, definitely the first solid video-worthy trip for fluke on the crankbait. And as you saw, I got lucky with the Evergreen crossover, but there are many more crankbaits to try. Different hook and line configurations, different float rates and depth ratings. This is just the beginning. And I hope you found that entertaining, getting a little peek into the process of how I start dialing in a new technique. By the way, that little dragonfly salt is still the best knife I've ever bought for fishing. Okay, thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.